Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of Unearth Horticulture. Today, as you can see here, I've got some Valentine's Day themed plants, all from my local Kroger grocery store. Because you know what I realized is I've done some tutorials on how to break down market bouquets, and I'm gonna throw that link in the description below for all you lovebirds. But I haven't actually done a tutorial on what to do when you receive plants from someone else, because there's lots of unknowns when you are gifted plants. You don't know where the plant came from, how long the plant was in transport, or how long the plant was with the person before they gifted it to you. You don't know how well it's been taken care of at the store it was purchased at. You don't know pretty much anything except for what you can observe physically on the plant in front of you. So today in this episode, we're going to talk about what you can do to set yourself up for success when you are gifted houseplants. Because of all the unknowns surrounding your gifted plants, all you really have is the physical plant in front of you to work with. There's really 4 things that you can check off the list to make sure that you've done everything you can to make inbounding the houseplant process as successful as it can be. I'm not going to lie, sometimes things happen that are out of your control, and if the plant was delivered to you after being outside in a car in 20-degree weather, there's no way you can actually control that. But if you do these 4 steps that I'm going to go through the video in this video, then you know that you have done everything you could have done to ensure the success of said plant, okay? So the first thing you need to do is identify your plant, because most of the time these kinds of plants are coming with tags that say things like assorted foliage or mini foliage. They don't actually identify the plant that's sitting in front of you. In fact, this plant doesn't even have any kind of tag on it whatsoever. So unless you have a horticulture degree like me or are a plant fanatic, you might not be able to identify your plants right off the top of your head. The best way I've found to identify plants is to use Google Lens. Google Lens is a wonderful tool because it pulls images like a search engine, but image driven. And so it's going to pull images of other plants that look like the picture you took of your plant and try to as closely match that image and identify it for you. I always recommend finding 3 collaborative sources at least that tell you the same thing. Now, with differing plants, it's hard to do that. So sometimes if all else fails, you may just need to contact your local horticulture agent or horticulture expert. But most of the time, Google Lens is going to work. So the first things first, you got to ID your plant. And then that way you can do some research on your plant and its care. That is the second step, because I guarantee you, if your plant does have a tag, it's going to be very, very, very generic on said plant's care. If it's saying assorted foliage, that means they're probably putting this tag in assorted foliage before shipping it out, which means it's not going to be very specific plant care to your plant. So I can tell you right now from my horticultural knowledge that I have here, a sago palm, which is not a true palm, but in fact a cycad. I have a syngonium. I'm not sure which cultivar it is because it's a mini foliage, and when they're mini, sometimes they're not showing their adult foliage yet. So this is a syngonium. It's in the aroid family, the philodendron family. And then I've also got here a primularia, which is a type of gesneriad in the African violet family. So those are the 3 plants I have here, but Google Lens would have got me there in the end. So the next step, step 2, is research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and, if I were you, look on, first I'd check Renata's Garden website, because I have a plant guide there and it is all information based on scientific fact and my education at Kansas State University. You can also use any .org websites or .edu websites like extension. I don't believe people utilize their extension website pages enough. If you don't know what extension is, the main thing is that they produce research that is science-based, and then they work on extending that to the public through extension agents and websites. So it's all about consumer education, largely about agricultural fields. like plants. So utilizing those extension resources is really valuable. And so those are great places to look for plants. A third source besides renatasgarden.com, extension websites, is society websites. So like Gesneriads, for example, there is a whole Gesneriad society. I guarantee you there's a cycad society. So their pages, although not the first thing I would go to, they're very niche and not always expert or research driven. They are still really excellent resources. So you might check those kinds of websites. Steer clear of blogs or companies that are trying to create blogs to sell you their plants. Okay, so research. The third thing you're going to want to do is scout your plants. And what I mean by scouting is you're going to check for pests like creepers and crawlers, anything moving on your plant or munching on your plant. And you're also going to check for foliar damage or spotting, that kind of thing. So it's the upper part of your plant. You're checking the upper part of your plant. So in order to scout, what you're going to do is look specifically at new growth areas and flowers and also leaf backs, because that's where bugs like to hang out. They like to hang out in hidden places and also where the most nectar is. And so you are going to check for things like spider mites and thrips and scale and mealybugs. There's all kinds of houseplant pests you're going to want to look for. And some plants have tendencies to it than others. But honestly, on first look, at first glance, this Primularia is looking good. Let's take a look at the Syngonium, largely looking at leaf backs. I think that has my star of approval. And now the Cycad. What's a little concerning to me about the Cycad is there's a little bit of mottling, like discoloration on the leaves, which can sometimes signify mites. And I know for a fact Cycads and palms tend to have issues with mites because they grow in really dry production facilities, and dry air always reaps mites. And some plants are just magnets for those. But I'm not seeing anything crazy. There's some lighter coloring in the top, but that's just new growth. That's very normal to see. Sometimes you might notice physical damage, like if there's spots or brown areas and it's very secluded. Sometimes in production and in transit, plants get their leaves bonked or get things dropped on them. So sometimes there's some physical damage. If you do notice any kind of foliar spotting, just keep an eye on it and keep your plant quarantined. That's the next thing. If you do discover pests, you need to determine, one, whether your plant is worth keeping and treating, because I'm a big believer that if you have a lot of plants that are worth a lot of money in your home and you care about them, sometimes plants aren't worth keeping if they've got something as nasty as mealybugs that are really hard to treat on foliage plants. So quarantine it if you do decide to keep it, by keeping it in a separate area and just checking in with it on a weekly basis. Make sure you're washing your hands between dealing with that plant and other plants, and that you're not like touching your watering can or your clothes to that plant and then going over and transmitting those pests to another plant. So just keeping it a little quarantined if you notice any foliar issues. If it is physical damage, the problem's not going to spread. It's just going to be there, because plants don't heal themselves. They just prevent further damage if they can by wound responses. That's a whole nother topic. Okay, so we did the identification. We researched our plant to discover what its environmental requirements are. And then we checked the tops of the plants, the visible part above the soil. The last thing on this handy checklist is checking the roots. I'm a big believer in popping your plants out of the pots to see what is going on with root health, because your roots are going to tell you a story on watering history. If it has been in a plant shop and they're being lazy about watering, just throwing water on it every other day, you're going to be able to see in the root zone if that is the case. So all you're going to do is you're going to take it out of the pot, and right off the bat already, I can tell you this little tin is full of water, because actually Gesneriads are better bottom watered. So I'm sure the floral department just threw in an inch of water and then dropped this back down in there. But from what I can tell from the other Primularias that were sitting there, they were very, 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 very wet and starting to show it. So let's just see what we've got going with these roots. Actually, you know what? These are looking really good. They're very one-sided in the pot, but you can see they're looking white and healthy, and they're present and accounted for. The plant's looking great, flowers still going. So to be honest, this plant has my check of approval. Oh wait, wrong one. Check of approval. Sometimes they drop pots, lots of pots and pots and pots to make it look good for production or for sale, especially during Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, in floral departments. But honestly, that is a very happy plant right now. So I've done the 4 checks on my checklist with that. So that is going to be great to find a spot for in my house. Next, let's go with this little guy, this little mini foliage plant. I have love-hate relationship with the marketing idea of these miniature foliage plants that Wild Interiors does, because basically what they're doing is they're taking tissue culture starts that come without any soil. They're just little starts with roots. They're shipped in, and then they stick them in their hydrofiber plugs and root them like within a week or 2, and then they ship them out right away. And they're not very well rooted, and also it's really hard once this hydrofiber dries out to get it to take in water again. So you can see this plant is super dry. You can see it only has this many roots. In fact, I couldn't get all the hydrofiber out of the bottom of this because there weren't even roots down to that point. So this isn't very well rooted, and it's already drying out. These are very sensitive plants. So when you get plants this size, even though they're cute and they're cheaper, so whoever bought you that cheap plant, you know, that relationship, I don't know what this says about your relationship, but they are stupid cute. So just this one, I've scouted and everything. It's just, I am now aware that the root system is the way it is. I'm not really going to change much about this because it's going to be hard to get this out of here without, you know, hydrofiber is not a bad media. It's just, it's less than ideal, its rooting situation. So I'm just going to keep a more intensive eye on this. And I know this because I check the roots now. I'm going to try to get it a little bit better rooted before eventually transplanting it. I use this rule of thumb for 2-inch plants to check them twice weekly if they're a foliage plant in this size, because they will use water that fast. That doesn't mean I'm watering them twice a week, but it does mean I'm checking to make sure they're not looking like this. So that's that one. Roots aren't rotted, but they're definitely not established. So last on our little journey here is the sago palm. I had a sago palm all through college, and the main thing that concerns me is because this is not very, this tag is not specific to this. It concerns me. These are very toxic to animals, and there is nowhere on here that it actually tells you that. So that's another reason to do step 2 and make sure you do your research, because while some plants are mildly toxic and are perfectly fine to have within reach of your cat or dog in case they do a little munchy, if this plant were to get munched by your cat, it'd be a little bit more of a serious issue. There's only a few houseplants I'm like, you gotta watch them. The Araliaceae family, which is the English ivy, and Schefflera family, those I keep an eye on, and then the cycads as well, because these have narrow leaves and cats like to chew on stringy, narrow leaves. So that's another reason to identify and research your plant, because I've got to make sure and keep this out of my cat's reach. The main thing I hate about this plant, and we're gonna do the root check on this, is the moss around the sides here. I hate it when floral places or commercial greenhouses put moss around the sides, because all it does is create habitats for fungus gnats and algae and mold, and it makes it harder for you as a grower to actually be able to tell what the moisture is like in the pot. And cycads need regular drying out. So if they've got moss around them, they're gonna not dry out as quickly, especially in a house setting. So that's less than ideal. So first thing to do with that one is actually to remove the moss. Anytime you get a plant with moss around the base, get rid of the moss. Can you tell it's a soapbox of mine? All right, so we're gonna pop this out and see what we're dealing with. All right. First of all, I'm kind of feeling how firm the base of this is, and it's feeling pretty good. Even though it looks kind of dark at first, I was a little worried about it being overwatered. It's very healthy. The grower did a good job with this. I'm gonna spill all this soil everywhere, but you can see the roots are healthy, they're firm. And this plant, honestly, there's lots of space for it to root further. It's going to stay in this pot, probably in my house for 2 to 3 years before I consider changing. The only thing that will make me change it is if the soil is getting kind of tough and hard, which can happen faster with some soils versus others, or potting mix is the official term. There's active roots in everything. And in fact, this has some nice moisture level in the root zone, so I won't have to water this probably because it was mulched with moss. Probably won't have to water this for at least another week. So happy cycad. I wouldn't be opposed to having a little bit of rock around this if you like the look of that, the arid look of that. Rock is a little bit better than moss. It doesn't retain moisture at the surface around the base, which could cause crown rot. So anyways, so we've gone through our checklist with all 3 of these plants. And just to review, the 4 things that you need to do to ensure the best chance of your success when receiving plants or bringing them home is 1, you're going to identify your plant accurately. You're going to research using good resources like renondasgarden.com or extension websites or society websites. All 3 of those are excellent substantiated sources. And then the 3rd thing you're going to do is you're going to check foliage. You're going to check the upper part of the plant for pests, questionable spots, physical damage, and you may need to quarantine your plant depending on what you find. I can tell you, as a matter of fact, I saw lots of spider mites in the grocery store when I was there. And then the 4th thing that you're going to do is check the roots. Don't forget to check the roots. It's probably the most important of all 4 things to do because it's going to tell you more about the history of your plant and what's gone on with its care before it arrived at your home. There is one thing that's not on the checklist, but I want to tell you not to do. The number 1 thing you don't want to do is really change everything about the plant all at once. You'll notice I'm not going to repot this little foliage plant yet, even though I think it's in too small a container. It still needs time to root, and these plants are going to need to adjust to your growing environment. And if you change too many things at once, like you change the soil because you're like, that's not the right soil, or if you untie things that were trained on like your money tree or staked on your orchid, that's going to cause a more likely possibility. It's going to increase the chance that your plant's not going to make it just because you're changing so many things. Let your plant adjust for 2 to 4 weeks in your home before you consider doing any of the repotting business, because believe me, if your plant has grown this long in its current conditions, it will last for another 2 to 4 weeks without a problem. I think the number 1 thing people do that's not a good idea is have a panic mode and overcorrect and change too many things all at once. So I guess that's the 5th item on the list. Anyways, all right. I hope you get lots of plants in the future, and I hope that this video helps you and ensures your success. So that's all I have for now. See you next time on Unearth Horticulture.